Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon, and I pulled a muscle in my stomach sneezing yesterday. The worst. I'm here with Jake Ziegler, who is close personal friends with Woody Nelson. That's a person I made up because I forgot Willie Nelson's name.
Close enough.
On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. We're not looking back too far today, just to 2017, to two awesome movies, or at least two movies I think are awesome, and one that it seems like I'll have to defend. Let's start with that one.
Yeah.
All right. So I assigned you You Are Never Really Here. Lynn Ramsey's 2017 festival release, 2018 wide release in the United States, starring Joaquin Phoenix. This movie is about a former soldier, government agent of some kind, a very traumatized guy who now lives with and takes care of his mother and hunts down child trafficking rings very, very brutally. I saw this during the pandemic for the first time. I didn't see it in theaters. I thought it was wonderful. Really taut, short, to the point portrayal of trauma and the legacy that leaves on people and what it causes them to do to other people. I saw your Letterboxd review. It was 3.5 stars. And on your scale, that's like a 0. So
That's a little exaggerating.
Well, tell me what you thought about it.
I liked this movie. I didn't dislike this movie. I don't think you're going to have to defend it too hard because I think there's a lot to like about this movie. I think, atmospherically, it's really good. And I will preface this too as saying I was excited to watch this. I was glad that you recommended it because it was just, one that for whatever reason slipped past me. I had wanted to see it. I liked the one other Lynn Ramsey movie I'd seen was We Need to Talk About Kevin, which I thought was very good. I haven't seen it since it came out, so I don't have super strong memories of it, but I do remember it being very good. I remember Tilda Swinton being very good in it. I remember thinking, boy, that Ezra Miller is going to be a big, big star, which turned out to be true for a little while. So, I had fond memories of that, and I was excited to watch this movie, and I think this movie is good. I think Joaquin Phoenix is really, really good in it, as he is in everything, and you described him, as a tortured individual, which Joaquin Phoenix movie does that not describe? That's pretty evergreen statement for most of his films. So I was into this, and I like Joaquin Phoenix, and I like a majority of the movies he's in. I think generally he picks pretty good projects. So I think this was a good movie. There was just something that I didn't connect with it on an emotional level. There was nothing for me beyond just the appreciation of the technique and the skill that was obvious in the making of, and the acting of the film. But there wasn't anything about the characters that really pulled me in, unfortunately. And I really wanted there to be. And I don't know, maybe I had a different expectation, or maybe it just I watched it in the wrong mood or something. There's all kinds of things that can be in play movies here, but I certainly don't think it's a bad movie by any means. Not at all. 3.5 stars is not a 0. That's not true. But yeah, there was just something that held me back from from really engaging with this movie.
I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I've seen it said that 3.5 stars on Letterboxd is what you put when you didn't like the movie, but you feel like you were supposed to like the movie. So I think it's a 5-star film. I appreciate what you're saying because I feel that way. It's funny because the roles are kind of reversed. This happens with us a lot the other way, where you're really excited about something. I'm actually pretty stoked to watch it. And then I'm like, it just didn't quite hit what I wanted it to hit in me. This did for me. I can't say anything like resonated on a personal level because I've never had any kind of experiences like this. I've never been trafficked, thankfully, known anyone who's been trafficked, nor have I been a vigilante. But look, you mentioned the craft of the movie. I think spot on. It's really well put together. All 4 of Ramsey's feature films, I've seen them all now.
Yeah, let's talk more about those in a little bit. I'd like to hear more about her other 2.
For sure. There's a lot that runs through all of them. Like there are thematic pieces in Ratcatcher that run through this actually, and Morver, I'm going to say her name wrong. Yeah. Her second feature is the main character's name, Morvern Callard, but people get it wrong in the movie, and I'm going to get it wrong in saying the movie. Samantha Morton's character, Morvern Callard, she's also post-traumatic in that movie. That film starts with her partner having committed suicide, and then the rest of the movie is how she responds to that. Ratcatcher is about a young, very impoverished Scottish boy who starts the movie by witnessing and perhaps in part causing the death of a friend of his. And the rest of the movie is like his guilt played out as the rest of his life, I don't want to say falls apart, but as he waits for his life to move on while his family is being rehoused from one housing project to another. His father's quite abusive. We Need to Talk About Kevin, which you've seen, is a brutal look at a school shooting, not gun violence, which I think is actually the downfall of that movie, but intense violence from a young man who is in the mold of all these school shooters that we see all the time, and what raising a boy who was so disturbed does to his mother before and after the incident. And then this movie where Phoenix has clearly been abused his whole life, and his mother was abused, and now they're trauma bonded. They have that connection with each other, but Phoenix's character is always thinking about, remembering, and sort of quietly reenacting his childhood trauma while he murders people in the pursuit of saving young girls from pedophiles. For me, this is far and away her best movie. I waited a long, long time to watch We Need to Talk About Kevin. I never wanted to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I find I do know why, because it's disturbing, but I really avoid school shooting movies more than others. Like, I didn't want to watch Villeneuve's Polytechnique for a long time, and then when I watched it, I wasn't so impressed with it, and I can't say I wasn't impressed with We Need to Talk About Kevin. I was impressed with it, but I thought that the final few scenes really let the movie down. Like, showing Kevin shooting the bow and arrow over and over and over again, but not the victims. I appreciated not seeing the victims, but on the other hand, it just sort of made him shooting the bow and arrow look silly. I don't think that the climax of a school shooting movie should look silly. So that didn't work for me. But anyway, we're getting pretty far away from a lot of this. So it's the trauma that runs through all of these movies, and I think it worked best in You Were Never Really Here, followed by maybe Morver and Caller, which is almost like a sequel. You could argue it's a sequel to Ratcatcher, because the man who is dead at the beginning of Morver and Caller has the same name as the little boy who's the main character of Ratcatcher. It takes place 20 some odd years later, because Ratcatcher takes place in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And there's a question of whether or not that little boy dies at the end of Ratcatcher, but you could argue he didn't. And then he's dead at the beginning of the next movie.
Sure.
To me, it's Ramsey at her best. I've been rambling. Tell me about how you saw this, pros, cons versus We Need to Talk About Kevin.
Well, it's going to be hard for me to compare with We Need to Talk About Kevin, just because it's been, it was 2011 or 12 when it came out, and I haven't seen it since then. So it's been a very, very long time. But, and just in terms of the performances, I mean, nobody can do trauma quite like, Joaquin Phoenix kind of has the market cornered on these, very tortured, traumatized characters. This is what he excels at. I mean, the description that you gave of the character, traumatized, lives with his mother, who's also traumatized. I mean, you described Joker, basically, which came out a couple years after this, in which he, finally won his Oscar for. And I think this, kind of describes a lot of his other characters too, that have been, traumatized in very, very different ways. You can even look at movies that he's been in, like Quills. Have you ever seen Quills?
Never did it. And also, it's funny, the first person who ever described Quills to me was my mother. So there's something like icky about all that in my head. So
yeah, I can see that. If you can ever get past that, Quills is a great movie, and Joaquin is just out of this world in it, and I feel like it's kind of one of his forgotten performances. But yeah, I mean, he's doing great work in this movie. There's just no doubt about that. But again, in this movie, for me, it was the ending that just, I don't know, it just didn't, I don't want to say if it didn't work for me, but again, it just didn't, there was nothing that, it just didn't make me feel anything. I mean, I have a kid who, obviously, I have no experience with any sort of trafficking, no connection to any sort of trafficking. I've never been a vigilante either. And, if we were, not like we would admit it here, but, so like I have a kid. So, I mean, you think movies like this maybe would speak to me a little bit more. And then maybe that's why I was surprised that it didn't. But even at the end of this movie, which, standard spoiler alert, we spoil most of the movies we talk about if you don't want to know, like, what happened at the end, but he saves a child. He saves the governor's daughter, who he was going to save.
State senator's daughter. The governor was the one who was targeting her.
Right. So he saves the daughter, and they are going to go somewhere. They're going to go somewhere together. And maybe it was just the ambiguity of it. When he pictures his own suicide, there was just something about, there was a disconnect in that for me, and I think that's what maybe dropped it down from a 3.5 to a 4, or from a 4 to a 3.5 for me, was that ending where he pictured the suicide. It was like, I know he's traumatized and all of that, but like, finally by the end, like, couldn't he get, wasn't he getting some kind of catharsis by saving this, by saving this girl, and by, doing the thing that he'd been set out to do. So I don't know, maybe that was the disconnect for me, because I was, really into the story. And like I said, it's short. It doesn't waste any time. I love movies like that, where there's just not a lot of extraneous dialogue. I'm super into that. I thought that was cool. So I think it was that ending that kind of, dropped the half star for me.
Okay, so I'm going to go on defense a little bit here, just because
I want to hear. Yeah. I want to hear another take.
I really like the ending. And I think the way you brought it up is the perfect way to start talking about it, because I don't want to say there's no catharsis, but the ending is definitely making it clear that he's not fixed because he saved this girl. his trauma is deep-seated. It's going to last his whole life, however long or short that may be. He tries to kill himself multiple times throughout the movie. There's a great scene in the middle. The thing that Ramsey does that I love so much is she does these otherworldly sort of avant-garde moments in her movies, but the movies still remain rooted in reality. So they're different than like Beau is Afraid, for example, another traumatized Joaquin Phoenix movie where yeah, huge chunks of the movie are unreal, including the ending and like a 30-minute animated piece. I think that movie's super cool, but this one is more rooted in reality. Another spoiler. His mother is murdered by some of the governor's hitmen, henchmen, whatever. He goes to bury her at sea in a pond, and when he puts her in the water to sink, he puts rocks in his clothes so that he'll sink too. And there's this great moment where he's sinking, you think he's finally going to have some peace, but then he sees the girl and knows that she's still in trouble, and he's like, I can't kill myself yet. I think the restaurant scene, the diner scene at the end, is sort of the reverse of that, where he has saved her now. She asks where they're going to go. He says he doesn't know where. He says they can go wherever she wants. She says she doesn't know. And then it seems like maybe she's frustrated. She gets up, she walks away. And he's thinking, well, it doesn't seem like she needs me, but I've saved her and now I can kill myself. So he has this fantasy where he kills himself and no one around him cares, which is what he wants, right?
Right.
He couldn't kill himself while his mom was alive because she needed him.
Yep.
As soon as she died, he could, but then remembered, nope, someone else needs me. So he didn't. And now this girl seemingly doesn't need me and no one will care. It's still, he's having this fantasy, but then she comes back from presumably the bathroom, says it's a beautiful day, which is the name of the movie in France.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
And this is a British-French movie, so if you look it up on Roku, even if you say into Roku, I want to watch You Were Never Really Here, the thumbnail comes up and it says, A Beautiful Day.
Interesting.
So he's not free of his commitments. So now his life has to go back to how it was. And in a very mundane way, he puts his straw in his mouth and takes a very slurpy sip of his drink and then hard cut to black. To me, that was great. It's like he's trapped. He still has to live his life. Like, who knows what his future is? I doubt he raises this girl. But we have seen, you said he saves her. He didn't really save her. She killed the governor. And he just showed up.
Right. He got her out of there at least. He did a part.
He did. Right.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the movie, or in the middle of the movie, right at the top of Act 2, he saves her from basically like a whorehouse where she is and all these other kids are the prostitutes. He tells her to close her eyes while he kills the people in the house. Not the kids, but the security guards and the other men who are preying on these girls. She watches. And then I don't think it's a coincidence that after that, she commits her first murder.
Right.
She's sort of becoming him in a way. I just think that it gives you a lot to chew on. And what I love about Ramsey movies, too, is there's not a lot of dialogue in these movies. So except for his handler who totally McBains himself by literally saying, let's go out on my boat and ride into the sunset 2 scenes before he's murdered.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that. I like that you can think of this going in a lot of different directions going forward. And Lynn Ramsey's not making sequels aside from her pseudo sequel to Ratcatcher. Yeah. So that can always just be like whatever we make of it. And I really love that. And it's funny because we need to talk about Kevin. I think its big drawback, it's her only movie that goes beyond 90 minutes. It's like 2 hours and a little bit of change. And for me, I was like, we get it.
Yeah.
Raising him is hard. Raising him is torture. But like, do we have to feel tortured? That was the point. But it's just not what I wanted in that movie as much. I still think it's a good movie, but
yeah. I mean, when was the last time Tilda Swinton was in a bad movie? Like, are there too many?
It probably happens just because she's in every movie.
Right.
Say one more thing before we move on. Yesterday, you also texted me and asked, why do conservatives get all gussied up for Sound of Freedom, but not for this movie? And I had like a knee-jerk answer, but I'd never seen Sound of Freedom, so I couldn't say for sure.
And I haven't seen it either, just for conversation purposes.
Right. But I did watch it today, so I could have this conversation with you. And I just want to give you my findings. So first, before I even get into that, you mentioned Joker. I like You Were Never Really Here. So I said to you when you first mentioned that you'd watched it, I said, this is my Joker. You said you were surprised I give it 5 stars. I'm like, no, this is my Joker. I don't think Joker's that good. This is like what everything Joker should be.
But Joker was the last movie we saw in theaters together.
I know. And I cherish it for that reason, but I also fell asleep in the theater.
That's right.
Sitting next to you.
That was the first night you met my wife, too.
True story.
Who was not my wife then, but, you know.
Yeah. But as far as like disturbed veterans or mental patients who save a little girl, This is the better Taxi Driver. Okay, so Sound of Freedom. It's interesting. You Were Never Really Here has all the makings of a movie where conservatives would get hyped up about it, because these are government officials. Really, the machine is doing the sex trafficking of little kids. They don't say what party, so it's not easy to be like, oh, it's the Democrats. Although the governor does sort of feel like a Cuomo analog to me, as someone who's lived in New York for a long time, or the New York area at this point, but it's never explicitly said. The reason I said to you yesterday, and I still believe this, why I think they don't get into it, is because Joaquin Phoenix is a loser. He lives in a crappy house with his whiny mom. He's ugly, fat, long hair, disheveled. He looks like an incel. No one wants to fantasize themselves looking like that. I watched Sound of Freedom. Now, the guy that Sound of Freedom is based on, I forget his name, he's a really handsome guy. And Jim Caviezel is a really handsome guy.
He's also Jesus.
He's quite literally Jesus. He has the same initials and played him in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
He has no faults in the movie. He's not like the greatest person who ever lived, but he never second guesses himself. Everything he asks for, he gets almost immediately. Kurt Fuller plays his boss, even when and I love Kurt Fuller, like Wayne's World for life.
Yeah.
Whenever Kurt Fuller has to say no to him, he either immediately reverses course and says yes, or someone else comes along and helps Jim Caviezel figure out what he needs. So he's just like, it's ultra competence. He has almost no real obstacles in the movie. He's basically Superman. It's just much more appealing to think of the fight against sex trafficking as being that, right? It's not going to happen right away, but eventually the good guys will win. Whereas in You Were Never Really Here, he still wants to kill himself at the end of the movie. That's not aspirational.
Yeah.
The weird thing is, Sound of Freedom has no politics. It's not big bad government that's doing all this pedophilia and sex trafficking. It's just like random criminals and rebels in Colombia. So I guess you could otherize it and say, yeah, because it's Hispanic people, that's easier for conservatives to at least modern conservatives to wrap their minds around.
Right.
But it doesn't let you blame the libs. So I didn't really get that. And it made me think that maybe the studio planted these stories about it being a conservative movie, because there's nothing all that conservative about the movie. It's just kind of boring.
And that really surprises me. Like, I just kind of assumed there would be that kind of slant to it, because that's all we heard about, and all the, theaters are canceling showtimes of it because they don't want, they don't want the conservative groups to see it. That literally happened in my town. Like, I live in a small town, and it was a person, and it wasn't a bot, because it was a person whose name I knew, who was friends with friends of mine, who spread one of those, like, we tried to go see it at the Gaylord Cinema and it was canceled because of this and that. And it was like a whole long post, like, they're trying to get us not to see it because of it was a whole thing. And I'm just so shocked that there was no, like, political slant on the movie at all, because that's everything I expected.
None at all. To me, it just strikes as like, this is a great, like, your buddy or your friend of a friend who posted that long post, they did viral marketing for that movie. Like, more people probably saw it based on that post who wouldn't have otherwise, because I know you live in a very conservative area. It's not a conservative movie. In fact, it's like a real easy watch. I gave it 2.5 stars. It's not bad. It's well shot. There's some like wonky CGI at the beginning and the end, but who cares? It's well edited. Caviezel is really the only problem with it acting wise. Bill Camp's quite good in it, in his sort of hamming it up kind of way. Like I said, Kurt Fuller is good. Most of the side characters are good. Mira Sorvino has absolutely nothing to do. It's weird she was in it. Yeah, I don't know. It's much more of a nothing movie than a bad movie.
Well, I actually want to say something else about Kurt Fuller.
Yes,
because
please.
I know you love Kurt Fuller. You're going to be seeing him in another film that we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks.
What movie is that? Or do I want to be surprised?
I mean, it's not a huge surprise, but he is in No Holds Barred. Which we'll be talking about.
So I know that. I mean, yeah. I just because I haven't like either watched No Holds Barred all the way through ever, or it's been since I was 5 that I've seen it.
Yeah,
I know that Kurt Fuller is the villain in No Holds Barred.
Yeah. So I'm just excited. I just wanted to remind you that we'll be talking about Kurt Fuller more in some more detail. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
So we're not going to be talking about Tilda Swinton more, but she is a regular collaborator with Luca Guadagnino, who is the director of the movie that you recommended for me. So tell me about Call Me By Your Name.
Well, I recommended it for you because I think it's great. I just think it's a great movie. I was surprised you hadn't seen it. I thought you would really like it. I think it's just a beautiful movie in a lot of ways. I think it's really well acted. I think it's really well shot. I mean, I love these kind of movies that are shot, in the Italian, just the views and the vistas and all of that stuff. I think is really cool. I thought it had a vibe that you would dig. Timothee Chalamet has kind of blown up since then. I know he had been in movies before this, but this was, I would say, kind of his breakout. I mean, he was the lead of the movie. He got an Oscar nomination for this. He was 22 years old when this came came out. It's just kind of a really big movie, and it was one that was a little surprised you hadn't seen. It was one of the bigger movies. It was an Oscar nominee that year. We'll talk about that, a little bit more at the end. Best Picture nominee and all that. So it was once I looked at the list, it was an easy recommendation. I think it's just really a great movie, and we watched. My wife and I watched it again, and we both still really loved it. Very anxious to hear what you thought about it.
Yeah, so my wife had seen it also and liked it a lot and was also surprised I hadn't seen it. But until Challengers, I had never seen a Luca Guadagnino movie.
That's really interesting. Now, was there any reason that you hadn't watched Call Me By Your Name, or?
No, not really. I think 2017, I was doing just watching a lot more TV than movies. That was right around the time I was getting back into pro wrestling. So that was taking up a lot of my brain space. I was like, I have to watch every NXT show ever and review it. So, that was taking up my time. I was doing the Too Old to Date podcast, which was taking up a ton of my time. I just wasn't watching as many movies then. Luca wasn't on my radar. I didn't know anything about him. It's funny because I thought about this conversation that I brought up with you probably around this time, around 2017. I remember saying to you, there's no one quite like Tarantino right now whose movies you can identify by looking at them right away. And part of the reason I said that is because I hadn't seen a Luca Guadagnino film. And also there are, of course, there's so many auteur filmmakers now, but I'm so much deeper in the movie dunghole now than I was then that Tarantino was the easiest one to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is such a Luca movie. But on the other hand, so I mentioned at this point I'd seen Challengers, and then because you recommended a couple episodes ago, I watched A Bigger Splash, and because I watched A Bigger Splash, I watched I Am Love. Now, I Am Love and A Bigger Splash really are of a piece. They have the same cinematographer. And Luca was doing a lot of his quick pans, which I love. I think it's one of the coolest things that he and that cinematographer, who has a difficult name to pronounce, were doing. And then that came back for Challengers. It is decidedly missing in this movie. Now the Italian countryside, which he loves, is very prominent here, as are beautiful men staring longingly at each other.
Yeah, no shortage of that in this movie.
Yeah. So just real quick, what it's about is a young boy who's the son of a language researcher. I never quite understood
archaeology.
It's archaeology. Okay.
Yeah, I remember they're going through when they find the statues and all that stuff.
That was very cool.
Really neat, yeah.
So they spend their summers and their Christmases at their mother's inherited country home. You wonder, how does an archaeologist afford this place? I'm glad they pretty early on tell you that she inherited it. And they're a Jewish family in the Italian countryside. How does that jive?
Well, they mentioned that too. I thought it was interesting how he says we're really the only Jews here.
Yeah.
He tells Armie Hammer, besides us, you're the only Jew who's probably ever set foot in this town.
Yep. And I like that Armie Hammer responded, I'm from New Hampshire. I'm used to being the odd Jew out.
The odd Jew, I actually wrote that line down. I literally wrote that down. Yeah, odd Jew out. And then Timothee Chalamet at one point calls them, he's like, oh yeah, we're more Jews of discretion.
Jews of conversation.
The star, yeah. He's like, we're Jews of discretion.
Right. So that becomes important. So Armie Hammer plays Chalamet's father, who's played by Michael Stuhlbarg, and I think the role that clinches the movie, his research assistant for the summer. And he's probably 6, 7, 8 years older than... Oh, no, Chalamet's playing 17. They're 10 years older than Chalamet.
Chalamet's supposed to be 17. Hammer's supposed to be 24. He just looks older than that because he was 30 and Chalamet was 20 when they filmed it. But the actual ages are supposed to be 17 and 24.
Okay, so Hammer is playing way older than he can pull off. And
way younger than he can pull off.
That's what I mean.
Yep.
I've always said Hammer can't pull off anything except the Winklevi, so that continues here. I think he does a pretty serviceable job here. He's not the best part of the movie. No. And they start an affair, the two of them. A really not so secret affair. It kind of seems like everybody knows and nobody cares. And that's it's so funny that this movie, which takes place in the 80s and is about a homosexual affair at a time when people you would assume, care about a homosexual affair. No, that is not the tension of the movie.
Italy too. I mean, I don't think it would probably have been, maybe it wasn't as big a deal as it would have been in the States.
Italy's pretty conservative. It's not France, I'll tell you that.
Right.
That being said, everyone's speaking French. Chalamet's mother in the movie is French. His dad, his would-be girlfriend in the movie is French. A lot of people. I think it's in northern Italy, which borders France, so probably a lot of French tourists around that time. But regardless, I bring it up to say the movie is not about will they be found out or not. The movie is about their love story. It's very simply a love story. And I liked but didn't love that. I was into it but not obsessed with it. And then the Stuhlbarg for your consideration speech happens
It
at the
still
end.
gets me too. Yeah.
It really tied the movie together for me because Luca is a show don't tell kind of person, much like Lim Ramsey, but it was this and this monologue, despite being much more tell than show, does it in a very poetic way where Stuhlbarg talks about like why this relationship between Chalamet and Hammer was important, even if it leads to nothing. Why remaining raw, not letting yourself become cynical because of heartbreak is so important. And also like what aging means for your prospects of love. I loved it. I was like, wow, yeah, that totally made the whole. And it's pretty rare for me that the end of a movie can. I don't want to say rehab because it's not. I wasn't disliking it up to that point, but can so thoroughly just like that's the thesis statement, and it works.
Yeah, well, it elevates the movie, I think, and I'm even, I probably liked it maybe a little bit more than you did, but yeah, it still like elevates the movie into something better than it was before that in one monologue.
100%. I was ready for it to be, and I said this in my Letterboxd review, I think, Guadagnino has a high floor, but the ceiling's not that far away. And I was ready for this to be the floor of what I thought of now the 4 movies I've seen of his, because it's pretty hard to find his early movies, and they're not that well regarded, and I'm scared of his horror movies.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Suspiria, I remember being not that great, and Bones and All has kind of aged pretty poorly in my mind. If you're a completist and like you really want to get to him at some point, sure, but like I don't highly recommend them. Like as I do the other 4, I recommend like pretty heartily, but yeah, the other 2 I don't love.
And then it turns out the only movie I like more than this is Challengers. And even that, honestly, is kind of close because while Challengers, I think, is like pretty thrilling the whole way through, there's just nothing topping that Stuhlbarg monologue for me.
Yeah, the way he delivers it, I mean, makes me want him. Like, I love my dad. My dad's the coolest guy ever, and I saw that, I was like, I wish this guy was my dad. Like I just wish. And not only do I want him to be my dad, I want him to be everybody's dad. Yeah, I want everybody's dad to be like this understanding and this thoughtful and this insightful and, this knowledgeable and smart. Like I'm choking up just like thinking about it, just like, to have this kind of wherewithal to be able to impart that on your kids, at that young of an age when he's that impressionable and, going through this sort of thing for the first time. That's just invaluable. You can't, I mean, that's just going to set him up for so much, just so much success later on in his, in all of his relationships that he has going forward. It's just remarkable. I don't know how much of this was taken directly from the book, but James Ivory wrote the script for this, based from the book, and he won the Oscar for this. And I think, yeah, it's really an incredible screenplay. However, he came with that monologue is great, and Stuhlbarg just knocked it out of the park. I don't know how many takes it took. I just want to believe he did it in one. And that's what I'm choosing to believe.
The only whip pan in the whole movie is during this scene when Stuhlbarg, I can't remember if he's lighting a cigarette or pouring a drink.
Cigarette.
He reaches over the table to get the cigarette and then comes back. So that could have been a cut in the and also you get Chalamet's reaction shots to it too. It's not just a oneer.
Chalamet is just, I think, is dynamite in this movie. I can see why he became a big star after this and continuing to be a big star.
Yeah, so you mentioned he broke out in this. He did. This came out right around the same time as Lady Bird, which was what I first saw him in. So no surprise that, this was like the big breakout year for him. His role in Lady Bird is much, much smaller than his role here. But can we just talk real quick back to Stuhlbarg? He wasn't nominated for anything.
He's never been nominated. He's been so good in everything.
But I mean, he wasn't nominated for any awards at all for this role.
Not even like...
No Golden Globe, no some other third thing, nothing at all. This was a pretty strong year in that category. Christopher Plummer in All the Money in the World. Come on, give me a break. Like, I feel like he was getting that award because he subbed in for Kevin Spacey. And like 100%. I like Three Billboards a lot, but 2 nominations in this category for that movie is a bit much.
Yeah, I really like that movie and both those performances. They're
good. I don't like The Shape of Water, though Richard Jenkins was very good in it. Oddly, Stuhlbarg was in The Shape of Water.
He's also in The Post that year, too, which was a third. He was in 3 Best Picture nominees that year.
That's wild. The only nomination that I can be like, okay, yes, absolutely deserved this at least as much as Stuhlbarg was Defoe in The Florida Project.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love The Florida Project.
Oh, I'm so frustrated. Yeah, Stuhlbarg's never been nominated for an Academy Award.
Like, not even for A Serious Man? Come on.
I know, give me a break. I know, at least he got a Golden Globe nomination for A Serious Man. I would give him a nomination for Men in Black 3. I think he's the best part of that movie, and he's hilarious in it.
Yes, he is. He's one of those guys. He classes up every movie he's in. A lot of people probably don't know his name, but when they see him, they're like, "Oh yeah, that guy." He's one of those guys, and he's just incredible.
Thank God for the Coen brothers for discovering him. Did we do a Serious Man on this podcast? No, we talked about it when we did our Coen brothers episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was discovered because he could speak Yiddish, so they put him in a Serious Man. He didn't speak Yiddish in the movie. It was crazy.
Those wacky Coen brothers.
So talk to me about Oscars. I know that You Were Never Really Here got no Oscar love.
None.
But what about, well, it didn't even really come out until the next year in the States wide anyway. But what about Call Me By Your Name? What did it do?
It did great. It was nominated for 4 awards. It didn't win any of the Oscars. Or no, it did win. It won one of the Oscars. James Ivory won for the Adapted Screenplay Award, and he was also the oldest winner of a competitive Oscar at the time. He was 89 years old when he won that, so that was a good win. And then Chalamet was nominated that year as well. He lost to Gary Oldman for Darkest Hour, which is fine. Like, I'm happy that Gary Oldman has an Oscar because, I mean, it's Gary Oldman. He's freaking awesome. But like, Darkest Hour I think it's a fine movie, but like, respected actor plays Winston Churchill in a stuffy biopic. Like, that's like a cliche of a joke that someone would make about an Oscar-winning movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a look. Gary Oldman deserves an Oscar for his body of work. I mean, he's great, but like, what a lame ass movie to win an Oscar for. I mean, whatever. Daniel Kaluuya was nominated that year for Get Out. He would have been great. Hugh Jackman did not get nominated for Logan, and that would have been another great nomination to put in there. Chalamet, I think, was a worthy nomination too. So I mean, it was good category that year, but Oldman definitely got that was a career Oscar for sure. And the other 2 nominees, of course, it was up for Best Picture, which it lost to 3 Billboards, and then it was also up for the song Mystery of Love, the Sufjan Stevens song that plays midway through the movie. Not the one that plays at the end, but the one that plays midway through the movie. And Sufjan Stevens is a Michigan resident, so go Michigan.
Well, speaking of Michigan, let's do our top 10s, because I've got a pretty jarring Michigan movie in my top 10. Yeah. So I guess I'll go first, but real quick, a couple of honorable mentions. I want to mention Junkhead, which is a Japanese stop-motion animated movie that is my gatekeeper for my top 20 of 2017. 2017, crazy good year for movies. Mm-hmm. And because of that, Call Me By Your Name didn't make it. Probably be 21, but didn't quite make it. John Wick 2 is one of my honorable mentions. Love it. Good Time, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, The Florida Project, 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, the best Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, Lady Bird, Get Out. Those are my honorable mentions. Love all those movies. Yeah, really strong. And then now when I tell you my top 10, you'll be like, are you okay? Because my number 10 is Detroit, the aforementioned Michigan movie. So I think this was a really strong year for female directors. Catherine Bigelow directed this one about the riots in Detroit. This is a horror movie that's dressed up as a drama, but basically a group of teenagers are taken hostage by Detroit police in an old abandoned mansion, and awful things happen during the riots. It was one of the most uncomfortable movie-going experiences that I've had, and I saw that in the theater. My number 9 is First Reformed. This is Paul Schrader's best movie, in my opinion, where Ethan Hawke plays a very dejected priest whose son has been killed before the movie begins in combat, and whose wife and him divorced because of that. And he comes upon a suicidal person who's catastrophizing because of the climate crisis, and his pregnant wife.
That would be a 2018 for me too, because it didn't come out in the States until then. So.
Got it. Well, I've got a few others that are going to fit that bill too. Number 8, the most well-reviewed movie of all time, Paddington 2. Paul King's masterpiece, I think we can all say, about Paddington, going to jail and having a good time there.
With Brendan Gleeson, of all people.
Yeah, and then evil Hugh Grant.
So amazing. What a great movie.
Good. My number 7 is a Masaki Yuasa film that I imagine came out in 2018 in the States, called Night is Short, Walk On Girl, which is a manga adaptation about a guy trying to find a girl who he fell in love with, at a university festival. I think Masaki Yuasa is the most underrated, and he's very highly rated, but I think he's the most underrated animator alive. And this is my second favorite movie of his.
What's your first?
Mind Game.
Oh, right. Yeah. I like both of these movies too, by the way.
Yeah, they're great. This movie is so joyful and fun and weird and experimental and funny. Highly recommend. Night is Short, Walk on Girl. My number 6 is Blade Runner 2049. Denis Villeneuve makes a movie. It's probably going to be on my list. So the sequel to Blade Runner, starring Ryan Gosling, the returning Harrison Ford, and sort of Sean Young. I think either de-aged or AI. Hard to know.
Yeah, something like that.
And then really good supporting performances from Jared Legos, of all people. Ana de Armas is really good as a hologram. Sort of like
that was like her first thing, wasn't it?
The first thing I ever saw her in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sort of taking the idea of like what is a person even farther. Dave Bautista in what I think is really his breakout role. And if you like that, you should watch the short film, the short prequel to this, or lead into this, called like Blade Runner 2046 or something like that, or 2048.
Where can I watch that? I've never seen it.
Probably on YouTube.
Okay.
My number 5 is The Big Sick. This was Michael Showalter movie. Michael Showalter had been known before this for like really big comedies. This is like it's very funny, but he took it down a bit. Kumail Nanjiani's breakout role. He and his wife wrote this together about their experience of his wife's illness. Great performance from him. Great performance by Elia Kazan's granddaughter, or great niece or whatever. Holly Hunter and Ray Romano are incredible in this. Love it. Has the best 9/11 joke I've ever heard. My number 4 is You Were Never Really There, the aforementioned trauma movie about a hitman trying to save girls from pedophiles. By the way, my top 4, I have given 5 stars to all these movies, and that's pretty rare for me in a year. My number 3 is Coco, one of my favorite Pixar films, about a little boy who wants to play music, but his family is anti-music, and he ends up in the land of the dead. This is a great movie. When I think I talked about this when we did our Pixar episode, but I saw this in the theater. I wanted to cry so bad at so many points that it hurt my throat. And I saw my buddy who I was seeing it with just go like this at one point and started bawling because that was all the permission I needed. You mentioned that Hugh Jackman should have been nominated for Best Actor for Logan. I agree. It's my number 2 movie of the year. It's incredible. I'm not mad at Deadpool and Wolverine for what it did to this movie, but I do hope that it makes more people go back and watch this movie. Maybe people who are like a little young for it in 2017, because it's just a great Western, great noir. And how can you be both of those things? I don't know, because James Mangold pulled it off and it was awesome.
He did.
My number 1 is Death of Stalin, the Armando Iannucci farce about what the title says. Probably Steve Buscemi's last great movie. I can't think of anything big he's done since then.
The only thing I can think of since then is King of Staten Island, which was super mid. So
totally agree. And it also has, I have to tell a really quick anecdote. So the villain of this movie is played by Simon Russell Beale, and he plays Beria, the man who wanted to succeed Stalin. He was a very evil guy. I mean, all these guys were evil guys, but he was an especially evil guy. Simon Russell Beale was on Broadway. I forget what show he was in. Well, I saw him in the Lehman trilogy, which he's incredible in. In fact, that's probably the show that it was. And around that same time, a friend of my wife's was dating the piano player for that show, and he got COVID. And this woman, this piano player, got Simon Russell Beale to leave a voicemail for him that said, "Hello, Toby. I hear that you have COVID. How boring. We're all over here just waiting to get it too. I'm sure it'll be dreadful." And I have listened to this voicemail over and over and over again of Simon Russell Beale sending this voicemail to a friend of mine. It's great. Anyway, Death of Stalin is hilarious. And if you like Veep, you would love, because it's the same guy, you'd love it. That's my top 10.
And that was a 2018 also, so that won't appear on my list. There was a couple of those, like Night is Short, Walk On Girl was a 2018, and some of those others. So some of those won't appear on my list, and there were maybe some of yours in your honorable mention that are in my honorable mentions too. I'll throw out a couple other movies that I liked and just mention a few others that were in my honorable mention for 2017. Big favorite in my house that we've watched over and over and over again, and watched since my kid was little. Lego Batman came out that year. We love Lego Batman. We love Will Arnett as Batman. We quote it pretty regularly around here. Just a ton of fun. Another ton of fun that came out that year was Thor Ragnarok. Still, I mean, easily the best Thor by a wide margin. And I still think one of my favorite MCU movies. Another movie that came out that year was Kogonada's Columbus, which we talked about a little bit when we talked about After Yang. Great performance from John Cho. Is a really, really quiet movie that I thought was just beautiful. And also another movie that year that came out with The Post, I thought was really good. Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, Steven Spielberg.
I don't like that one. I think it's super boring.
I remember I only saw it the one time when it came out, but I rated it pretty highly.
I was ready to be like, oh, I like all these movies too.
Yeah. And also outside of my top 10, amazingly, is as highly as I've spoken about it, Logan is outside of my top 10. I actually have it at number 14. Again, I also haven't seen a lot of these movies in a long time, but obviously I think very highly of it, and it's certainly one of the best films of 2017. Coco is also outside of my top 10. So there you have it. Still great movie.
I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. And I'm going to get into my top 10. A lot of movies in my top 10 are movies that you named like as honorable mentions. So, and a couple of these I'm not sure maybe you haven't seen or maybe that you don't like. So I'll be curious to see your reaction to some of these. My number 10 is a movie that you did mention with Willem Dafoe, The Florida Project, Sean Baker film about a apartment building where Willem Dafoe plays, what is he, like the building manager or something, where he's just, trying to help everybody out as much as he can. It's kind of a place where people who don't have anywhere else to go and are really struggling with life, stay, and he does his best to try to help them out. It's really a beautiful movie. My number 9 is one that we talked about at great length, is Call Me By Your Name. My number 8 is Paul Thomas Anderson, Phantom Thread. It's the last movie that Daniel Day-Lewis was in. I love this movie. I think the fashion in it is great. I love the performances from Daniel Day-Lewis and Leslie Manville as his, I think it's his sister. Where do you land on Phantom Thread?
I like Phantom Thread.
Mhm.
I like that you said you like the fashion in it, whereas you would normally say I like the costumes in it, but the movie's about fashion, so you're predisposed to say fashion. I think it's cool. It's probably in my bottom half of PTA movies, but there's only one PTA movie that I think is, like, for me, tough to watch. I just really dislike it, Inherent Vice. But I do like Phantom Thread. What's her name?
Well, Leslie Manville is his sister, and the other one is Vicky Krebs.
Vicky Krebs. Yeah, I saw the Corsage, the movie that she starred in, and I hated it, and so now I hate her a little bit. But she's very good in A Phantom Thread.
Yes, she is. Yeah, she's a great foil for. Daniel Day-Lewis is kind of a giant figure in just about any movie he's in. So it's no small feat to keep up with him in any of his movies. She's really, really great in it. Also, the score in that movie is phenomenal. My number 7 and 6 are both movies that you had on your list. My number 7 is The Big Sick. Like you said, it's hilarious. It's touching. Ray Romano, of all people, is hilarious in this movie. I mean, the star of one of the most milquetoast sitcoms of all time is just kills it in this movie. He's just so good in it. And Holly Hunter, of course, is amazing in everything she's in. And I love Kamal Nanjiani. Zoe Kazan's great in it. My number 6, Blade Runner 2049. I feel similarly about Villeneuve. Love his stuff. Love Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford. Love the whole bit. All great. Number 5, another movie I'm surprised I didn't hear you mention anywhere in honorable mentions or anything, is Dunkirk. Where do you fall on Dunkirk?
Yeah, so we did our Nolan rankings. It's probably third from the bottom for me. I think The Dark Knight Rises is not as good as Dunkirk. I think The Following is not as good as Dunkirk. And I think Tenet is not as good as Dunkirk. So it's probably fourth from the bottom. I only saw it once in the theater. I would like to see it again, maybe when Nolan's next movie comes out.
Dunkirk definitely did a lot better for me when I got to watch it at home and could, had the subtitles on. The 3 different time frames is really jarring at first, but they pull it off really, really well, because there's 3 different stories that are taking place within 3 different time frames. It's really different and takes a little bit of getting used to.
So I'll say like I said, I've only seen it the one time, and I thought it was dumber after I heard that there were 3 different time frames, because as I'm watching it, I'm like, well, this could all be happening at the same time, and I actually don't think it affects the movie at all, that one is a week, one is a day, and one is an hour. But that was just that first viewing of it in the theater. Like, maybe I'd watch it again and be like, holy crap. Because, the second time I watched The Prestige, I was like, there's so much more going on here than I thought there was.
Prestige is so good. Agreed. Okay. So then number 4 brings us to Lady Bird, Greta Gerwig's movie. Yeah, just a delight. I think Laurie Metcalf is amazing in this. Saoirse Ronan is great in it. Just everybody's great. And it's just a funny movie. It's touching. Really, really good. The number 3, the Best Picture winner of that year. I feel like you said you didn't like this movie, or maybe I heard you wrong. You said you do not like The Shape of Water. What's your beef with Shape of Water?
It's bad. It's a bad movie. No, I actually do think it's bad. I think Michael Shannon's the only good thing about this movie. His character is so vile and nasty. I really locked into that character. He's not in it enough. I think the main story, I don't know how you get into that story, because the creature, I just didn't feel any empathy for that creature whatsoever. I didn't think that the whole relationship between the two of them was not salacious enough to be shocking. So I didn't get anything out of it. And I found most of the characters irritating. I saw it in a beautiful old style theater. And even that did nothing for me, even though like that is in the movie while I'm
Right.
watching the movie. And when I realized that wasn't doing anything for me, I was like, I'm out. I'm
Yeah.
washing my hands of this thing.
Yeah. No. So I've been in the bag kind of for Sally Hawkins. I know you're not a big fan
Yeah,
either, but
not
I
a big
saw.
fan. Although
Well,
I said nice things about Paddington, so.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I saw this movie called Happy Go Lucky when it first came out in 2008, and I absolutely fell in love with her then. And I've, like I said, kind of been in the bag for her ever since then. And I really love this movie, and I love Richard Jenkins in it, and I love Michael Stuhlbarg in it, and I love Michael Shannon and everything. And like you said, he's not in it enough. I mean, pick a movie that Michael Shannon's in, and you can apply that statement to it. I mean, he's the best.
I dare you to watch that Werner Herzog Michael Shannon movie that I watched because I thought Batista was in it, but he's not. That movie's trash.
Well, that was your fault. And then number 2 and 1 are movies that have come up already in discussion. Number 2 is Jordan Peele's Get Out. We watched this again recently. I just think this movie is awesome. It's so funny. It's so clever, so creative. I think Dana Kaluuya is just so great in it. I love Catherine Keener. She's another one who, the first time I saw her being John Malkovich was the first movie I'd seen her in. I've just been completely infatuated with her ever since then, in a just an acting sort of way. Like I just love her in every movie that she's in.
I love her in a romantic sort of way.
Yeah. She's great. And I really think this is a really, really cool movie and an amazing debut for a writer director to have come up with something that's like so unique and so that just made such a huge impact the way it did. And Jordan Peele has gone on to do good things. I mean, Us and Nope, I think are both really good movies. I think Get Out is still the best of his 3, but I think Us and Nope are both very strong too.
I don't like Us that much. I think Get Out is incredible, and I think Nope is even better.
You think you like Nope more than Get Out? Mm-hmm. Interesting. We're due to watch Nope again. We haven't. My wife and we haven't watched it since we saw it in the theater, so we've been talking about doing that again.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about it on the podcast because I remember when we saw it, we had a very spirited text message debate about it.
Did we?
Yes, you didn't like the monkey stuff, and I went on this long diatribe about why it's good.
I believe you. I do not remember this.
I will find it for the day we talk about it.
You can, but like I said, I do believe you. You don't need to prove it to me.
I think our audience would find it interesting.
They probably would. And then my number 1 is a film I had to defend against accusations that it didn't deserve 2 Oscar nominations in supporting actor, is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Okay, fine. Yes, it didn't deserve to, just because you spread the wealth a little bit. I love the movie. Mm-hmm. I think McDonough has done no bad movies. I'm a big Seven Psychopaths defender, but get Stuhlbarg in there. That's all I'm saying.
Stuhlbarg should have been, I would have put Stuhlbarg in there above like just about anybody else in that category. Totally fine. But I think this is a really, really good movie. Yeah, I love McDonough. I love the way he writes dialogue. I love how his characters can be unsympathetic in ways, but are still interesting. And you still kind of want to see them maybe not succeed. Maybe that's not the right word, but you know.
I mean, I certainly wanted Frances McDormand to succeed.
I did too, but she does a lot of questionable, morally questionable things along the way.
Got to do what you got to do. I watched You Were Never Really Here today. So
yeah, right. And well, that's kind of his wheelhouse. McDonough, he's got a lot of morally questionable characters in his movies, and I think this one really does a great job of showing. I mean, McDormand, again, of course, one of our finest actors. Just in everything that she's in is so great. Woody Harrelson is great in this. Sam Rockwell is great in this. Caleb Landry Jones has a very small part in this, and he's excellent in it too. I really think this is a great movie. I love Martin McDonough.
People are trying to say this movie's bad now.
There was backlash against it when it happened. Also,
right.
when
we got into a big fight on Facebook with someone about it. I forgot.
Sure did. Someone who hadn't even seen it as it happens. Yeah,
I've since reconciled with this person. So,
oh, you have? Okay,
yeah. So we're not going to name names.
I have not. So, totally fine. But what's people's beef now? What are they like?
I think it's
why are we relitigating this movie?
I think maybe people are trying to say it's like a Green Book kind of thing, but I couldn't disagree more.
How in what universe is this a Green Book movie? I mean, the ending there's no indication. I remember a lot of the complaints at the time was that they're saying the ending excuses everything she does. Like, not at all. I don't see the ending as excusing any of the characters' actions in any way.
I think they were more mad that it excused what Sam Rockwell did.
See, and I don't even think that it does.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I think those people are insane.
Just because they were successful doesn't mean they were right.
Right, just because it happened, it doesn't mean that the movie's making some moral statement on it. Just because sometimes complicated things happen and things that are morally questionable. That's kind of what happens in life sometimes, and that's going to be reflected in the movies, especially in a McDonough movie. I mean, look at In Bruges. There's a lot of questionable things in that, but you really feel for those, the characters in that movie too, who are assassins, who are hitmen.
The person who's most honorable is the worst person in the movie.
By far, yeah. And it's...
McDonough's a genius. People should shut up.
McDonough's a genius. People who are hating on the movie, especially on Three Billboards, are insane. They're wrong, and I don't know. They're giving me a headache. Yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll be back next week with 2 movies I'm very excited to talk about because I just saw one of them in 4K in the theater. How cool! And the other one's one of the greatest movies ever made. So you could argue they're both one of the greatest movies ever made. We'll see you next week when we do 1956.